Good morning, everyone, and if everyone would get seated, I do apologize that we started a little late. There was an accident not too far away from here, and so we had a couple people coming in later. But without further ado, I will go ahead. Good morning, as said. My name is Dominic Knoll. I'm the CEO of the World Trade Center here, and I'm very happy that all of you came today and this morning to listen to this very distinguished panel today. I would like to welcome you all on behalf of our 1,600 members, and we are very, very proud to be here today and also to host this. But before we'll get in the session, I would like to recognize some of our partners, especially the Consul General from France, who was very, very helpful and is a true partner when we, since the beginning, Alliance Française, the French-American Chamber, and many others who helped also very much in getting this series of programs together. This is one of the series. We will have several others later that you find in front of you, as well as other speakers and speaker series that the World Trade Center has. To say one or two words, I said it's very, very crucial to talk about the environmental plan, and seeing what Europe is doing, as well as the coastal zone here with us, where we have distinguished experts also on this panel for it, because it's a very important issue that all of us will be confronted sooner or later, so to speak. And so with that, I would like to hand over to my partner in crime, so to speak, Jean-Claude Brunet, and he will go on with the program. Thank you.
Thank you, Dominique. And indeed, as you say, we are real partners in crime for a long time in presenting in many instances, the Euro-American and Euro-Louisiana connections. And I remember especially a conference we did together at Tulane Business School. And of course, also the panel discussion we had last year on other subjects. And I would really like to say, first of all, of course, bonjour and good morning to everyone. And to thank also the partners in this cooperation so the World Trade Center who hosts us today, and the other partners in the Euro-American celebration, which is the second edition this year. We started last year with also the same partners, World Trade Center, Alliance Française, and Franco-American Chamber of Commerce, Italian-American Chamber of Commerce also, and all the European Consular Corps members that I would like also to welcome today and to recognize for their support. Because indeed, I mean, I'm the French consul here in Louisiana, Jean-Claude Brunet, and it happens that I volunteered also last year to be the European Union local chair. And you may not know that actually in the Consular Corps in New Orleans, there are 20 representatives of European Union countries. My colleagues, honorary consuls, and myself as a career diplomat with the Consulate General. But we are so actually in the Consular Corps 20 out of 28 member states of the European Union represented. And so we are very proud to have this year again the opportunity to have the panel discussions like the one today. We will have later in the year, in June, also hosted by the World Trade Center, a panel on the transatlantic trade and investment partnership, negotiation, you know, very important on trade between the EU and the US, and it's a huge topic also for Louisiana, which exports lots of goods to Europe. But today I would like really to introduce and the importance of the other subject and the other topic that we wanted to address in this year's Euro-American celebration is the environment. And indeed, it's a topic that makes a lot of sense in terms of exchange of expertise between Europe and Louisiana, we are facing the same global challenges in the same global village. And it happens that we had, before even establishing this Euro-American, Euro-Louisiana dialogue, and so now for a second edition, long before we had experts contacts, and the panelists today will highlight the panelists from Louisiana and visitors will highlight some of these cooperation that have been already launched, like with the Netherlands. And then also we have the pleasure and honor to have French experts this week in Louisiana, and three of them are in our panel. But without further delay, and thanking all our organizers of this meeting, I will have the pleasure to introduce the speakers. And our keynote speaker this year is on my left, Dr. Christian Bruxmüller, who is he's counselor at the European Union delegation in Washington, D.C., head of the Energy, Transport, and Environment section. And we have the pleasure to welcome you again in Louisiana. You were part of the events I mentioned last year. And so thank you for coming, and welcome. Second panelist, so following the order in front of me, Mr. David Wagner, President, Wagner and Ball Architects, and he's especially, as I mentioned, the cooperation with the Netherlands, the architect of this cooperation. Then we have Mr. Benjamin Maygarden, project manager from Gaia Engineering Consultants. And thank you for coming also, Mr. Wagner, Mr. Maygarden. And then Mr. Harry Forhoff, fellow at the Tulane Institute on Water Resources, Law and Policy. Thanks also for coming and for the support of Tulane to all our European events. Thank you for coming. And we'd like then also to now to come to the French colleagues and experts. I have also particularly a pleasure to introduce today for this panel, and they are coming in the context of a bilateral cooperation that we are developing, and which was launched actually during the visit of the French Minister for Ecology, Sustainable Development and Energy in 2011 when I took my assignment. And so it's one of the priorities I had and I have in my duties as a French consul, and I'm particularly pleased to have our visitors today from France participating to this discussion. And so I will, in the order that appear on the table, welcome Mr. Degnaud, who is, and so I said a delegation from France, but we have inside this delegation a representative from a region in France, which is the region Aquitaine. So Mr. Degnaud is head of a consultant in engineering company in the Aquitaine region. So thank you for participating. And next to him, wow, don't worry, that's a small accident. Madame Marie-Pierre Mégan from the Ministry of Ecology, Sustainable Development and Energy, and she's the head of the international unit in the department in charge of the risks management, and she will tell more later about her responsibilities. And thank you again, Marie-Pierre, for participating. Thank you. And last but not least, a representative of my boss, the ambassador, because Vincent is the counselor at the Embassy of France in Washington, in charge of sustainable development and ecology and energy. And it's also a second time he's coming, or even third time actually, coming to Louisiana. He enjoys and loves Louisiana very much. Thank you, Vincent, for coming. So with all now the presentation having been done, we'll be pleased to ask our keynote speaker, Christian, to start our discussion. Thank you.
Well, good morning to everybody. Thank you very much. Sorry. Thank you very much for having me. I mean, it's always a good sign if you get invited for the second time. That means that you didn't screw up badly the first time, or that people in New Orleans have a short memory. I mean, that's also, and I have to be very careful what I say, always risking that Vincent might inform the Washington community afterwards and say, dreadful presentation by Christian. You wouldn't believe the things he said in New Orleans. When seated with a panel of such distinguished experts in their area of dams and dikes and water management and urban architecture, the best thing I can do is to stick to my guns and talk about European environmental, energy, and climate policy, and not to get into the hairs of the real expert. Because one of the things I think it's always interesting for an American audience to see is, well, the European Union. I mean, how does the European Union fit into all of that? Because you here in the US, you're already struggling with your three levels of government, the federal, the state, and the municipal, and you say, oh my God, they even have one more. I mean, poor people over there in Europe, because to the three levels of government you have here in the US, we add a fourth level, which is the European Union. And I think the panel today will show very clearly that the idea behind that separation is that every level is supposed to do what it does best. And the idea of the European Union is not at all to interfere and to mingle into things which are solved much better at the local, the state, or the federal level. So what the European Union tries in this area of the energy, the environment policy, is to set certain overarching standards which all the 28 member states think are best achieved at the European level, and then let our 28 member states get on with the work. And I think in this and to stick together and do things at the European level where we are just much better placed to speak with one single European voice. One example is, and I talked about that a little bit last year, the TTIP negotiation of the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, where the European Commission negotiates on behalf of all the 28 EU member states. And this gives us the possibility to negotiate with the US trade representative on an equal to equal footing. And you might know that there are some both energy and environment aspect to this negotiation. We have made clear at the European Union that we are both interested in having a better access to American natural gas and oil, but that we are also very much interested in increase the trade between what we call the green tech products, well, in French I would say something like the produits de pointe on the technological side. And and then also on the energy side, also to have more transparency in the energy sector, not so much between the EU and the US, but what we also would like to achieve with this agreement is to set a little bit the gold standard for international regulation in certain areas. Not so much because we think that either the US or the EU need to improve, but because later on, when we negotiate with other partners around the world, we can say, look, that's what we put into our free trade agreement with the Americans, and that's what we also would like to get with you. That's a bit what we call the gold standard sort of approach to things. On the energy and environment front, I think the biggest progress since last year has been that we have come out with a new proposal for the decarbonization of the European economy. Because if there's one sort of overarching goal in all the energy, the climate, the environment policy of the European Union, it's to decarbonize the European economy while maintaining a high level of growth, which I always consider is like squaring the circle. But we have something to show for. I mean, the only number I'm going to throw at you today is that between 1990 and 2011, we had a GDP growth within the European Union of 45%, so over this 21-year period, and at the same time, we reduced our CO2 emissions by roughly 18%. So what we have obtained in the European Union, and I think that is something to be proud of, is the decoupling of GDP growth and CO2 emissions. So we have proved that it is possible to have good, sustainable economic growth while at the same time lowering CO2 emissions. One does not have to go with the other. And last year I told you a little bit about our famous 20-20-20 goals. With that catchy phrase, or more or less catchy phrase, 20-20-20 by 2020, which probably one extremely gifted Eurocrat has come up with, which basically means by the year 2020, which is like only 6 years away right now, and against the baseline of 1990, we have committed to reduce CO2 emissions by 20%, increase energy efficiency by 20%, and have a 20% renewable share in the overall energy mix. So one question I always get now, the European Commission comes out with a 2030 plan, and first of all, you might ask, why now? We are not even at 2020, but I mean, industry needs planning security. I mean, for them, 2020 is tomorrow. I mean, they want to know what's coming afterwards, and will the EU continue with its downward trend on CO2 emissions? And therefore, the European Commission, which is like the executive branch of the European Union, has come up with new, more ambitious proposals for 2030. And then another question Americans rightly always ask, now wait a little bit, before you tell me all about your fancy new ideas for 2030, now how are you doing on your 2020 goals? I mean, it's always nice to sort of paper over perhaps things you didn't achieve in the past. And it looks good. It looks very good on 2 of the 3 targets. It doesn't look that good on the 3rd target. I can give you numbers there. So on the CO2 reduction target of 20%, we have already achieved by end of last year 18%. So, and we still have 6 years to go for the remaining 2%. So this is very doable. Nobody's worried about that. On the renewable target, 20% renewables in the energy mix, we currently stand at 13%, basically being 5 years into the project, still having 6 years to go, so also nobody is worried about that. Where we are not on target, astonishingly, is on the energy efficiency side. So it looks pretty unlikely that we gain by 2020 an increased energy efficiency of 20%. And that's a bit astonishing because many people consider that rather the low-hanging fruit. So now looking at 2030, and there has been a big discussion between the European member states because, as you might know, even the European Commission puts out that proposal to the member states united in the Council and to the European Parliament. The European Commission, like every sort of administration, doesn't like to get its proposals shot down right away. So what the European Commission normally does, they consult widely with the member states and the European Parliament before putting any proposal out there publicly to make sure that there will at least be a good discussion about this proposal. So the European Commission risks rather seldomly to go out there with a proposal and get the head chopped off right away. So we are not that stupid. We might be stupid, but we are not that stupid. And so for the CO2 emissions target, we basically go to 40%. So we are double the ambition. So after 20% CO2 reduction by 2020, we now say for 2030, we go after 40%. And this, I think, sends a very strong signal to everybody that the CO2 reduction is there to stay, and that we continue on an ambitious plan, and that the European Commission has never given up on the sort of the long-term target, what we have in the back of our minds, which is the decarbonization of the European economy and getting to an 80 to 95% CO2 reduction by 2050. This is just a plan. This is not the law of the land. But the European Commission has made it very clear that's its long-term goal, and in order to get there with credible steps on the way, we have to go for 40% by 2030. Then there was a long discussion with the member states already on an informal basis. Is it enough to have this one target? Do we need the two others, the renewable and the energy efficiency target? There were some member states who said, well, one target is enough, and then the other things are going to fall into place, and member states figure that out themselves, whether they go for more renewables, more energy efficiency, move from coal to gas. And others say, no, we have to sort of, just one overarching CO2 target is not enough. We have to. And the result, as always in Europe, is a compromise. So we have come up with a new renewable target, which moves from 20% to 27%. But the European Commission has not broken that down by country. So on the current 20% target we have, it's very neatly written down how much Sweden has to get, how much France has to get, how much the Netherlands have to get. And these targets are done in a way that some countries which have it easier than others, let's say Sweden, for example, which is blessed by hydropower and can get the 20% without any problems, they can easily get 30 or 40%, and so they can give Poland a helping hand. Poland very dependent on coal, so they don't have to get 20%. They are fine with 15% if the Swedes basically do 40%. So it's also always a question of European solidarity and adapting to what each country can sort of do or can't do. And on the last thing, on the energy efficiency target, we have now, basically we said, well, we'll see that later, because I think everybody feels a bit uncomfortable to put out a new target for a category where we are actually currently not on track. And anyhow, we have the Energy Efficiency Directive up for review later this year, so we are going to deal with that in this context. So I think if there's only one sort of message you take home from my talk today, is the European Union stays committed in the green energy field. As we go down the way of decarbonization of our economy, we are looking forward to staying at the technological edge of things, because we also think, and talking here in the framework of the World Trade Council of New Orleans, we think it makes good business sense, because we think at one point in time others will come around to it too, and if we have the technology at that point of time, others are going to buy it from us, a little bit like Americans want to sell their shale technology to the rest of the world. And the other thing is, we are also, and this is sometimes, Europeans get accused of being naive and sort of not seeing that, well, the sort of the energy, the real energy world is a bit different. And I can assure you we are not naive, and I think this is also shown by the fact that when it comes to the fossil fuel side, nobody in Europe believes that in the next 20 years green energy will do it all for us. And we are very actively engaged in a strategy of diversifying our fossil fuel imports. Just as the US, you have your one friendly neighbor to the north, Canada. I always say our Canada is Norway, which might not be 100% appropriate comparison, but besides Norway, we also source our energy from some places which might be a little bit more sort of risky, especially these days if you look towards the east. And so the European Union has embarked over the last year on a strong diversification effort for its fossil fuels imports. And for us, the US is a big part of that equation, because we know that switching from coal to natural gas has a strong environmental benefit to it, a strong CO2 reduction. So we are interested in receiving LNG exports from the United States, and I think you are here. You're a port city, so this is also a part of your bread and butter issues. And so we hope through the TTIP negotiations to pass it, because most of you will know that currently, if you are an FTA partner of the US, you get automatic access to US LNG if it then gets exported a couple of years down the road. While if you don't have an FTA with the US, you need a license from the Department of Energy, where the Department of Energy has to basically certify that exporting LNG does not go against the national interest of the US. And interestingly, this discussion has also started now on oil, even though it's a very nascent discussion. I mean, who would have thought that in our lifetime the US would even discuss the idea of exporting oil, crude oil that is, because trade in refined product has been going on for a long time. And so we see we see this as an opportunity for Europe to diversify and to trade in those energy products with a reliable partner. And I think if recent events between Russia and Ukraine have told us anything, it is that this kind of diversification strategy for us is more urgent than ever. And with these thoughts, I think there are many distinguished panelists who have much more interesting things to say than I. But I think we have a Q&A session at the end. So thank you very much, and looking forward to your questions afterwards.
Thank you so much, Dr. Brooksmiller, for those great remarks. Now we would just continue with the panel. I would say, David, if you want to, we would start with you, and then we just go down, and if you can give some of your impressions, and especially with your position, what New Orleans does, or Louisiana, in this very important issue. Thank you.
I'll try, Dominic. Is this on? Can you hear me? Yeah. Well, I don't have my images that normally I rely on to convey things. But I think you said New Orleans, so let's bring it home a bit to New Orleans. My experience is that New Orleans was fairly much in its own orbit, even though the World Trade Center existed, even though the river persists outside our doors and so forth. But weather brought home our vulnerability here 9 years ago and stirred a new interest in the outside world. My personal interest was first, and so was the interest of the populace here, stirred first in the Dutch, because the levee-in-bee condition that we experienced after Katrina, if you remember, were the broken things we had and the wonderful, beautiful things they had. But these things take time, and they take common commitment. What we have found is that there, in many cases, faulty paradigms, so that our view of the system, therefore our search for solution, had the wrong either metric or aim or ambition. So that in the simplest case in our work, the idea that we should drain every drop of water that falls in this bowl away from here and throw away what's the 21st century's real treasure, water, which has got other resources and opportunities. So we are actively trying to shed it. Even though on Friday night, we all worried about where it was going to go away from us, right? So I think in a lot of times it's that we really aren't asking the right questions. We also, in respect to Christian's talk, don't necessarily have the right measuring system for not only what we want. We haven't agreed in the United States very well, perhaps in the world, but especially in the United States, about what our principles are. We've broken down into factions and fractions, and we don't understand our common interest enough to then find the consensus that we need. So one of the ways forward is to go back and find the 5 things we might agree about as a country. You know, that we want to do X, Y, or Z. Because right now the factionalization is keeping us from being able to find ways forward. My belief is that this sector of energy with water, environment, and transport is a key way to look, and I believe that's your ministry. And in the United States, we don't have a ministry of water. That's something in Environmental Protection Agency, perhaps. I don't know where it fits into commerce because it appears fairly obvious it's part of the commerce system. We have transportation that operates in isolation. And environment is for, excuse me, this is not true, but it can be seen as for wackos, right? Which is fundamentally unhealthy. So the question, without dwelling into it, I'm trying to say, how do you get your mind around even the condition wherein we find ourselves? You know, is to try to push forward and say, well, what on earth is keeping us from acting in our self-interest? And that could transfer to common interest, but people are somehow not acting in their self-interest, and maybe it's because they don't have enough information, or maybe because they're distracted. But if we put forward, if we can find ways to put forward desirable futures, and that might also, we found, encourage us to think about frightening possibilities, things we don't want for our children. Maybe we can summon the action to do these common sense things that, you know, in New Orleans we have to talk about, we used to know that. We don't have the faith in the future here, and whether that's prophetic or habitual, I don't know. But to have some faith in the future and that you can, in fact, make these adaptations, and in making the adaptations, there's ways to make money, and that in making money, then the society grows. I mean, all these sort of ways that this fits together. I'll say, and stop, because I think if we can go around and then get to some questions and answers, it'll be better. New Orleans has a huge advantage, and it's evident in this room. It really dawned on me. You learn always when you go somewhere else. You know, I get to go to Beijing. I have to go to Beijing next week, and then I get to go to Holland, and then I get to go into Germany briefly. It looks like in Switzerland, and so you see things, right? You learn from things, but sometimes I only learn about work. You know, maybe that's my perspective. So we were working in this rebuild by design thing in Bridgeport, Connecticut. In Bridgeport, Connecticut, it dawns on me two things. One, that there is no resilience, which is the common buzzword in America today, without some money in the pockets of the poor. No one can do anything if they have nothing to exchange. It's only a matter of exchange that allows you to adapt. But the other thing, the thing about New Orleans in particular, we saw that after Katrina, right? Who was out there in the water? We saw it. It's the poor people. So that's a real issue. But the other thing that I saw in Bridgeport, Connecticut is I doubt that too many people from Germany are anxious to go to Bridgeport, are looking to go to Bridgeport. So that is a national condition, I would say. It's a state condition, it's a national condition, it's a regional condition. New Orleans is actually an international condition. And I think that that gives us huge advantages if we portray ourselves, understand ourselves as that, but it also gives us a place where we can not only stay relevant, maybe to the Germans or the Dutch or the French, but also maybe try to lead America, because we have these lessons that are pretty evident across our landscape, and lead America forward out of this morass of, you know, denial, and get back into the game and I think the right role of America in the world, which is something of leadership instead of, you know, being the dumb guy you have to drag along and hope they don't sink you. So, because I mean, I think that it's really where New Orleans has become most relevant. The trade aspect, we have bananas again. The oil aspect, yes. The water aspect, yes. But it's the integral aspect of all this, and the quality of life aspect of all this. So I think that New Orleans today beckons to be an international portal, and I hope this is just one of many examples of that.
Should we start? Does this function at all? Well, I'll just speak loudly because I'm not sure this is on, but I'm Ben Maygarden. I work with GIA Consultants here in New Orleans. We're an engineering and environmental firm. And there we go. Fantastic.
Sorry if no one heard me.
I'm not an engineer, so I couldn't figure out the on button. But just a little bit of background on me. I actually was trained as a historian, and for the past 20 years I've been working on environmental issues, usually in relation to infrastructure projects of governments or private clients. And one of the things I've done quite a bit of is land use history in this region, and more recently I've done work supporting my firm in forensic hydrology, which may not be something that everyone is familiar with, but that's basically identifying past conditions of hydrologic conditions of rivers, streams, marine water bodies, and so forth. And I just wanted to take a little historical perspective, if I could. I'm really interested in the remarks so far, the sort of architectonic comments we've heard. And if you look back at Louisiana's very interesting natural history, I think a lot of us are familiar with the general conditions here. We're an alluvial coastal plain. The river formed fairly narrow natural levees, which were the obvious places to settle and farm. These were surrounded by swamps and then marshes on the Gulf side, saltwater side. And really from the very beginning of European settlement, you started to see significant environmental changes. First with deforestation for agriculture, land drainage, which began on a very small scale, of course, without modern machinery, pumps and so forth. But as the 19th century progressed, you really saw much more dramatic engineering effects on the landscape. You saw larger levees, a more effective or more significant hydromodification of rivers and streams. And these cumulative effects on the environment, we've had them for a long time. There's no such thing as a portion of southern Louisiana, coastal Louisiana, that has not been affected substantially by these major environmental changes. And this is not something that's really simple and obvious for people to figure out. The complexity of it is very great. Of course, in the 20th century, we had the added factor of petroleum exploration and production. It's been a major driver of Louisiana's economy, crucial to our economy, crucial to the important in the national economy. And of course, it's had very, very profound environmental impacts. Well, not all of this, as I say, is obvious to the wider public. Certainly, scientists, academics, engineers are aware of these factors. There's not complete agreement on how we got here to our circumstances today. And it kind of produces a problem when you start talking about things like coastal restoration. You have to have some understanding of how we got here, but we don't necessarily have time in southern Louisiana to figure out every aspect of how we got here. When we talk about restoration here, we're not talking about restoration to a period in time. That's essentially going to be impossible, in my opinion, anywhere in South Louisiana. I'm not sure the public always understands when you're talking about environmental restoration that you're talking about maybe an environmental benefit, but you're not necessarily talking about returning something exactly to the condition it was in the past. You're talking about a functional restoration in most cases. And the other point, besides, I'm not going to go into any more details of the environmental history than necessary, I think, for today's purposes. But another thing I wanted to mention is that I think we're all aware that public policy is having a hard time catching up with what technically we see needs to be done. That action has to occur sooner rather than later. And the large scale and the complexity of the response that is really required for coastal land loss means, of course, that policymakers, certainly in the United States, and I'm sure in Europe, have to engage a very broad spectrum of stakeholder interests. Certainly in the United States, and I think is likely in the European Union, these stakeholder interests can be extremely powerful politically. They don't necessarily hear the same messages that there's not agreement on what's to be done, how we got here. And of course, the United States as a whole is in a period historically, a historic period in which there is a lack of social and political consensus on many issues. Mr. Wagner, mentioned that in his remarks this morning. And you can take just a single case in point, the Bonnie Carey Spillway, which was constructed in response to the 1927 Mississippi River flood. It was authorized, designed, and built in 3 years. And that's almost unbelievable nowadays, that you could undertake a major environmental infrastructure project like that and complete it in such a short period of time. Aside from the fact that the thing works extremely well and has been extremely important to people's ability to live and conduct business along the Mississippi River and in southern Louisiana. Now, before we just throw up our hands and say there's no hope, you can look at the West Closure Complex, which is a similarly complex, equivalently expensive engineering project related to flood control, authorized and constructed in not 3 years, but certainly in less than a decade, which is pretty impressive for the way we do things nowadays. But this lack of consensus on how we got here, it's not just an issue of who do we blame. Is it the oil companies? Is it people that built the levees 75 years ago? Is it the Corps of Engineers? I mean, it's not just who's to blame. The bigger question is how are we going to pay? And who's going to pay? And I think some of our other people will address those questions now. But that's really about all I had. I hope maybe I can address some questions later.
Good morning, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak with you today. And in light of coastal erosion in South Louisiana and sinking in Greater New Orleans, I want to focus on the Louisiana Coastal Master Plan and the Greater New Orleans Urban Water Plan, which are comprehensive, integrated approaches that are based in science and aim to address these environmental issues. Specifically, I want to focus on the implementation of these plans and the hurdles that must be cleared in order for implementation to be realized. And so with those objectives in mind, I'd now like to convey a message from the mayor. A crisis had been reached in our internal affairs. We realized that we must decide quickly upon the adoption of a policy, either of progress and modernization on the one hand, or content ourselves on the other with remaining inert, satisfied with what we had and the conditions in which we lived, which would have been tantamount to a declaration in favor of retrogression and decay. We realized also that while the process of decay might be gradual, its result in the end would prove disastrous to us. And to prevent this, many difficulties would have to be overcome and many sacrifices made. Now, with all due respect to Mayor Landrieu, and in full disclosure, these are not his words. And they're not referring to subsidence issues in New Orleans, nor coastal erosion in South Louisiana. These words were spoken in 1914 by then Mayor of New Orleans, Martin Bierman. Bierman was recounting how the recurring yellow fever outbreaks in the latter part of the 19th century were having, quote, a depressing influence upon business, causing a lack of confidence on the part of the outside world, with a tendency to avoid New Orleans as an undesirable place, either for residents or for investment. So the people of New Orleans took it upon themselves to invest themselves and build a state-of-the-art drainage system, one that's largely in place today. But after 100+ years, we now realize that this system is creating another problem that threatens the sustainability of the city, specifically the pumping of groundwater, artificially lowering the the water table and causing New Orleans to sink. And similarly, over the last 100 years, our riverine flood protection system on the Mississippi, which was co-opted by the federal government after the Great Flood of 1927, has significantly contributed to the sinking of coastal Louisiana. And see, what I like about Behrman's speech is that it acknowledges that we can't stand pat, and that we must act not only to protect the health and welfare of those already living and invested in the area, but also to attract new residents and outside business. He reminds us that the people of New Orleans took it upon themselves and did some pretty big things without outside dollars, and that local investment must come before outside investment. Now, with respect to the urban water plan, investment starts by making it somebody's job to regulate groundwater, and in turn get a handle on subsidence, because right now it isn't anyone's job. And if we're going to create a new entity or add this job to an existing entity like the Sewage and Water Board, it'll need a source of funding. And people of New Orleans need to acknowledge this, and as a citizenry, demand it. Because if we don't act, the cost in the end will be much greater. As seen with the catastrophic hikes in flood insurance a couple months ago that nearly occurred, properties have the potential to become unsaleable overnight, driving away residents and investment due to forces outside the control of local and state authorities. And without a robust tax base, the city will lose its ability to successfully issue bonds and provide critical services and infrastructure. This is true both inside the levee system and outside the levee system. My point is that investing on the front end allows for continued viability of the city and the region on the back end. But it all starts with a legal mandate, the regulation of groundwater and subsidence. And the same goes for the Coastal Master Plan. Amazingly, prior to 1989, managing coastal subsidence wasn't anyone's job. Well, the state took it upon themselves, and recently in 2012, it issued a master plan that for the first time detailed specific projects and the costs associated for implementation. However, the 50-year, $50 billion plan does not factor in such things as inflation. And so waiting to implement will actually raise the cost in the end. Furthermore, with the emerging realization that large population centers like the Northeast, South Florida, the arid West are all in dire need of critical water management infrastructure, this region really can't rely on the steady stream of federal funding that has come in the recent past. Again, we need to be ready for that and prepare by raising those funds locally and statewide to handle the issue head on ourselves. And furthermore, we must stop wasting the opportunity to maximize ongoing federal investment in our region. One example is the routine navigation maintenance in the Mississippi River, overseen by the Army Corps of Engineers. This is where legal authorization comes into play again. While environmental restoration is now one of the Corps' general missions, coastal restoration is outside the scope of its dredging maintenance authorization, and therefore the dredging material is dumped off the continental shelf instead of being put to use for for coastal restoration. Again, this needs to change and will only happen through coordination between state and federal entities, and really with state funding. An example of a success on this front was after Katrina. To the astonishment of many, the Corps of Engineers continued to assume that the Mississippi River Gulf outlet, some people call Hurricane Alley, would continue to be a feature of the landscape. There's actually very good reason for this assumption. And Mr. Go would remain a feature of the physical landscape because it was a feature of the legal landscape. Congress told the Corps to construct and maintain this channel, and as long as it was legally authorized, it was its duty to plan around. It was not a question of science, engineering, public preference, or even good sense. It was a matter of law. Until that was understood and addressed, those asking the Corps to contemplate a future without the Mr. Go were asking it to do something that it didn't think was legal. That linkage was finally made by the Governor's Advisory Commission on Coastal Protection, Restoration, and Conservation, which ultimately led to Congress directing the Corps to develop a closure plan for the Mr. Go and its completion recently. And finally, as alluded to by the previous two speakers, before the citizens of the city and this region start demanding this type of investment, there must be a reevaluation of some of our long-held paradigms and an integration of new ones. With regard to the urban water plan, we must reevaluate our linkage of tropical disease with standing water and living with water. Similarly, we can't let similarly with coastal management and river management, we must integrate river diversions into our paradigms with navigation, because they need to work together. You're not going to have one or the other. We've come to realize that we need both. And that's basically my it. And so I'll look forward to questions later on.
Good morning. I'm Didier Riouet, CIO of Castagec, which is a coastal engineering company in France. So we are a French delegation of experts. We arrived in the US Monday. We have an interesting meeting with the World Bank. And yesterday we are also many interesting exchanges in Tulane University and with the CPRA in Baton Rouge. And yeah, what for me is the most interesting thing, and it was that there is a lot of similarity between France and here in Louisiana. It's that big storm. Here it's Katrina. We had the Cynthia storm in 2010 in France. And these storms changed everything in terms of taking into account coastal hazards. And it changes the policy, the way people are looking at these issues, and it changes coastal management. And the exchange we had with the CPRA shows that it's not a question of scale. Here in Louisiana, it's huge coastline, many problems, but I'm used to work on a smaller scale. But the issues are the same. The way to take into account the erosion problem, flood problem is the same. The political issues are the same. You have to take into account the costs and the benefits of your strategy. It's the same problems. And the conclusions are almost the same. So it's really interesting to be here and to have these exchanges, because it shows that the scale of coastal hazard, it's global, because it's a global warming. We have to take into account the sea level rise. It affects the problematic at a different scale, and it's really interesting. So what to say? I was, yes. Yeah, if you have other questions, I don't know. But yeah, maybe just to say that Aquitaine, because I represent Aquitaine French coast, is a small coastal area located in the southwest of France. It's 230 kilometer long sandy coast exposed to really big waves. We have also some wetlands, inlets, and the biggest estuary in Europe, Gironde, maybe Bordeaux region. And yeah, the way we are looking to the coastal management are really close to what is going to be done here in the master plan. So if you have several questions, it will be a pleasure to discuss with you, and I will let it to Marie-Pierre. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry for my voice, but it's better than Monday. Well, I'm Marie-Pierre Mégonc, and as I was introduced, I'm working in the French Ministry of Ecology, Sustainable Development and Energy. And so when we manage with work to go here to see you, we try to have at both level of the French thought and the strategy and work, the regional level with Didier and the state level, and here the UE level. So we are in sort of circle and trying all of them to have a strategy taking into account all this interactive way of working and thinking. In the French Ministry of Ecology, I'm responsible for international affairs in disaster risk prevention, and that's what that I want to explain to you. We choose in our French organization to have a global risk prevention strategy, and so we have a unit in the Ministry of Ecology because we think it's a global sustainable development problem, if I can say that. Unit could deal with risk. Of course, we have specialized little unit, but we wanted to think the risk in a global manner and to have a multi-stakeholder and multi-approach risk. And especially, and I will do the link with the coastal risk, which is one of the way to think the risk. We, France and you, US and everybody in the world is involved in a general UN framework for disaster risk reduction. And this United Nations framework, the frame, calling YOGO framework, because we deal on YOGO about it 10 years ago, will be to the end next year in 2015, and we are all working with the next framework. And what we want to promote, sort of a French touch in disaster risk reduction, is an integrated approach and to build our risk management policy. And what I mean is that we have to deal with natural and anthropogenic hazards altogether. And we have to develop risk management policy and strategy at all levels, including tools, especially spatial planning, and especially long-term urbanization and infrastructure way of thinking to deal with the risk. We all can live with the risk. For example, as we are here in a beautiful coast, and we have the same problem in France, everybody wants to live near the sea. And the business is very interesting near the sea because you exchange, but it's dangerous to live near the sea. And so we have to build policies integrating all of that and cost-benefit balances and the way to live with that, not without risk, not without a big precaution principle and doing nothing, but think to live with the risk and in a sustainable development way. And what I mean is that, of course, sustainable and, of course, an environmental sustainable way of thinking, including in our coastal risk and weather-related risk preoccupation dealing with climate change adaptation, not only mitigation, not only, but also adaptation. and but including also, of course, industrial risk, and including social and cultural and protection, just to have a resilient society, resilient city, and resilient way of thinking. And I was really very interested in the presentation I've heard here, especially in Tulane University and yesterday, that in Louisiana here specifically, you are very involved, I think, because of the big tempest you have to face, and because of your cultural heritage, to all that social and cultural patrimony you have, heritage you have, to protect and to live with, and to go away, to go to the future, but with it. And that's what we want to say and to discuss also with the World Bank, because we were in Washington with the World Bank, and perhaps you know they have a global facility, calling Global Facility for Disaster Risk Reduction, to promote all over the world, because it's a development bank project to build risk prevention policies and infrastructure and capacity building in this integrated approach. And it is difficult to think that, and to think that in all levels. And I just want to finish with an example, because we are here to discuss with you. We are trying to go in other parts of the world to discuss with other people who are not the same like us, but who have very similar problems, as Didier said. And with this exchange, we hope to build something we can share, and some principle we can share. And in France, we have the same problem. If we are, for me, at the state level, at the government, with all our local stakeholders, it's not even evident to share in France that we have the same problem. So if we change the level, we open our eyes. And to prepare the French position in this Yogo framework negotiation, we make in France a workshop with all stakeholders involved in risk prevention. That means business partners, that means local municipalities, region, department. You know, we have plenty of local powers in France. Even if we are little, we have plenty of them. That means different part of the French government, because I'm here representative of the French Ministry of Ecology and Sustainable Development. But of course, we are to deal with our Ministry of Interior, in charge in social and civil protection policy, with our Ministry of Foreign Affairs, because we are in foreign exchange, and our Ministry of Finance, of course. and we try to have all our stakeholders in it, and we host some of our foreign partners when they speak French, and when they are not too long, so too far away from us, and we try to have a title and a way of share of it, and we call that, with my colleague, globalization of major risk is also a problem for France, and try to have that idea that now we are in a global world, of course, in a little village, and if we have a little tempest in the south of France, all the impact can go just to here and in India or something else. And as I explained to the French partner, if we buy in France, for example, but here it's the same, I think, our T-shirt produced in Bangladesh in a factory which is in a very hazardous territory, because that part of the world is very exposed to especially meteorological risk, and in a place where the industrial safety policy is not as safe as other places. We are somewhere responsible for the price at the end of the T-shirt. And that's that sort of idea we try to put all together to build our strategy and to, well, think the risk. And I give the floor to Vincent to go a little up. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Just to close this round of remarks, I just want to emphasize the importance of resiliency and adaptation on the climate change agenda. It's really adaptation, resilient city, resilient coastline is really a key part of the climate change agenda. As you may know, we will host in Paris in 2015 an important conference on climate change. Why is it important? Not because it's in Paris, and we like the city very much, but in 2050 is the deadline that every country agrees to reach an international agreement on climate change. France will be the host of the conference, so we will not be in charge of drafting this agreement. It's under the United Nations process. But we can help to build the necessary trust between partners to overcome the difficulties. Our role is to envision the different possible scenarios to see where we can land in Paris. We will not be the voice of during the negotiation in Paris. The negotiation part is under the EU, is the voice of the EU. And we will have different challenge to overcome. There's different challenge on mitigation to reduce our greenhouse gas emission. Challenge on the financing. We have to be innovative to find new ways of financing the action on climate change. And of course, one of the challenges will be adaptation and the resiliency. And on resilient city, resilient coastline, there is really a key role for local authorities, for cities, and that's why we strongly try to create some links between cities, between local authorities. That's why we discuss a lot with our colleagues from the regional level, because they really have a key role on this process. And all of this have to be in what we can call a positive agenda. Well drafted, the action we take for adaptation, resiliency, for climate change are good for business, they create jobs, and they help protecting our communities. So it's one of the most important message we want to give is that all of these actions are linked. Climate change, adaptation, resiliency, it creates challenge for facing natural disaster, challenge for transportation, challenge for renewable energy, energy production, energy storage. But all of this really creates new business opportunity and force us to develop innovations. So that's the main message.
Thank you so much for this great discussion. Now let's go over to Q&A. We have a microphone there, so please, if you have any questions, let's now open up the dialogue. Thank you.
I work with the Regional Planning Commission here, which does a lot of transportation planning and gets involved in some environmental issues as well. And one thing that's potentially coming up for our region that I haven't heard talked about is air quality and how that fits into and connects to some of the topics that you're working on. It works with the, I'm sure the CO2 reduction plan is also connected to air quality, but there's the federal standard for certain compounds emitted into the air is expected to be lowered by the federal government, which would mean our region would become non-attainment. Our air would be not high quality enough. That comes with a lot of punitive requirements and changes that we have to do in the region. It means we can't do the same transportation projects that we want to, road widenings. It also means that businesses have to change their practices, like you can't do certain activities on certain days when the ozone levels are not good. And so I'm just wondering how you think about air quality, and also we're in a place now where any activity that we do is completely voluntary before the standards change, and then it will become regulatory and then punitive action that we need to take. So if you could talk about taking voluntary action and the connection to air quality.
Okay, it has just been decided that that question would be mine. That's always helpful, but I can do the same thing later on. Yes, on starting it from the end, the question of voluntary and regulatory, and there I can come right back to the three goals I laid out before, the CO2 reduction target, the renewable target, and the energy efficiency target. The only target that is not on track, that was a voluntary target, the energy efficiency target, which our experience has often been that a voluntary target is nice, but it often doesn't work because, well, most people say, well, it's voluntary, yeah, so let's see what we can do. And in our debate, people have always said, well, at one point there has to be also the stick. Most often the carrot is just not enough. And then there is this eternal discussion, well, but when does the stick get too hard for the industry to cope with this? And this is always the same in all policy areas. We have a big discussion right now in Europe on car emissions, which have a direct impact on air quality. So how much, and I think you have the same issue here in the US with the car emission standards. One of probably, if you see it from an environmental point of view, these CAFE standards, one of the biggest environmental achievements of President Obama during his tenure, that he was able to basically get the American car manufacturers to agree to rather more stringent CO2 emissions target. Probably wouldn't have been possible without the big bailout the US government did for Detroit, and that it was a little bit sort of a payback time for the car industry. So we have the discussion currently also on that air quality. So what can the policymakers obtain from the European car industry in terms of further CO2 reductions? And this is a discussion that goes on a discussion that just a humble, stupid lawyer like myself is completely lost in the milligrams and all that, and many engineers can argue for hours. So what is feasible, right? What is first technically feasible, and second, what is economically viable? But I mean, both sides try to push the envelope on this issue a little bit, and normally a good compromise, for example, the compromise that in Europe has helped us a lot is to tell some car manufacturers which have very big cars, so in a sense polluting cars, but those are the cars that actually make money for them, because there the profit margin is much higher than on the smaller cars, and basically say, okay, you have to get for your entire production line of all the models you produce. You have to get that kind of emission standards. So with your little tiny Mini, if you produce the Mini Cooper and the SUV, you can use the Mini Cooper to rebalance some of the emissions from your SUV, and you just have to get sort of an average sort of emissions for your entire. Then there is a big question, because most of the European automakers these days own various subsidiaries, and the company like Volkswagen is very tempted, for example, to say, well, we also own Seat, and Seat is full of small cars, so can we use also the Seat models to rebalance the Volkswagen Phantom? So there are all kinds, but I think in the end, Europe, and I think it's a very long winding answer, always tries to come up with some sort of a compromise deal. And I think this is something that sometimes when you watch US politics, where currently the compromise is always a bit difficult to achieve, we're 28 and we somehow have to get that sorted out together. And normally there is a lot of give and take, and there's always a deal to be found. I would say more often than not, it's some sort of compromise also between the voluntary and the regulatory. Often we use the carrot first and take out the stick, but always the stick is also always present in the back of the mind.
Do we want to have a U.S. perspective on that, if anyone wants to take a shot?
I'll just say that it goes back to I think the comment about everything's at scale, and it doesn't matter the scale. Well, then the opposite of that is always true too, that it's of course about scale. And so the blending idea that you have, and all the more numerical idea that is behind it all. I mean, in relation to the frequency of cars, the frequency of trucks, how much are we measuring that, and really we know where these particulate matters are versus what we're creating in Louisiana, especially along the river, because it's going to be very hard. Air tends to migrate as water tends to migrate. So the local and the regional are going to have to play together, and then of course it's really just one water cycle and one air cycle. And so that's why, I mean, these issues are, they're fundamental to sustaining the place. But it's a matter, everything's at scale, and then it's how you blend the scales and measure the scales.
I think it also, is just indicative of how specific environmental issues are going to have effects, regionally, and it's a very difficult task for somebody to weigh all this out and figure it all out. Okay, so air quality is an excellent thing. We all want better air quality. What is this going to do to our ability to develop industrial areas here or other things that might sustain our economy? And it's similar with other coastal issues. There's going to be trade-offs. You regulate one aspect of activity and it's going to affect your ability to do something else. And unfortunately, I think in dealing with agencies, that's part of the problem, is it's already so complex. The engineers can identify the solutions, but then achieving a policy that works is a much more difficult issue, if that helps.
Please, in the back.
Hi, my name is Joy Willie. I'm a relatively new resident in New Orleans, and I've been listening to the water conversations and very excited about the possibility, very excited about the fact that they adopted this plan. But I'm hearing some skepticism, cynicism about what can actually be done, and I'm wondering where we're at with that. Like this group this community do to push that agenda?
Referring to the master plan?
Are you referring to the urban water plan?
Yeah.
Well, David can speak more to the private efforts to adopt the urban water plan and kind of live with water. You know, so city officials are working with Sewage and Water Board to devise, you know, to integrate the plan into their ongoing investments in streets and current projects on the neutral ground. But perhaps David could speak to more of the private, like the private rain gardens and the like.
Well, we, I guess it's the largest body of work I ever tried to manage, but I believe we gave a vision, and I'm pretty sure, working with a lot of others, we had a great team. We gave a cost-benefit ratio that anybody in rational terms looks at and says, well, you would implement these things. It's got at least a 4-to-1 payback. And that's without any factoring of ecological benefit. And I think if we don't learn to factor ecological benefit, then that word dominion is going to recur as we die. But it seems that, you know, it's difficult to change the system. I feel like the public is looking for the private to act, and I think the private is waiting for the public to act, and it's sort of like who's in first. And you know, the strange thing about that plan is it's not really done for the government. It was done for really the federal government. HUD funded eventually this, but it was really done out of motivational aspect from, you know, we had to do something, and the Dutch government was very involved in supporting that effort. The Dutch government to this day is saying, when are we going to get back and try to implement this thing in New Orleans? People, you know, are trying to do that. But the longer this is seen as Dutch or David's or anything of that kind, the worse. You know, water is not a nicety here. This is a real issue. It's going to get us, or it's going to save us for some time. Urgency, I don't know if it's a good thing to communicate, because it's pretty hard at 9:45 in the morning to be afraid or urgent feeling. But your question's right. I think that, is it getting implemented? Are we missing opportunities? I think that there needs to be someone at RPC, and there needs to be someone at Department of Public Works, and there needs to be a whole army of people at the Water Board who are saying, where is that in this project? How have you accounted for? There was a woman in the city of New Orleans who basically just took on bike paths. I mean, and that individual within a bureaucracy, I like the bureaucracy phrase, but within that changed that. So in Amsterdam, you know, there's a person who every project has to come back and count the water balance. So it's got to become everybody's job, and it can't be deferred. You know, it can't be this Alphonse Gaston thing. It's got to be our work. And I think that's where New Orleans either leads or loses. But I believe people bought the vision. I think that we got to the level of consensus. And just as a last point, and I have to go in just a minute, but that's what these environmental things should be able to do. They should be able to build consensus, right? If we don't have air, and if we don't have water, or we don't have food, but if we can't make the economic case for it, if we can't make the business case for it, and some of these are not as easy. I mean, our society is built on consumption. And so what's the economy of economy? And, you know, how do we change our way of counting? I think, you know, your comment about the cost of the t-shirt is really it, you know. How do we count the true cost? Can we do that? And is there, I mean, because I think that's where you transfer this up to the appropriate level of the EU and the US and the federal. How do we start to count the cost of our actions and incentivize, right?
Flood insurance rates.
That's
a stick.
Right. And I suppose another stick could be the latest incarnation of the Sewage and Water Board's Clean Water Act discharge permits and a consent decree that really would require the implementation of green infrastructure to the extent practicable. And so I think some people are hoping that that will really spur Sewage and Water Board to implement some of the strategies as well.
Do you think that, just as a follow-up, do you think there's some learning from political or regulatory, and this is a forum from an international forum, is there something we could contribute here on the model of Christians, building consensus?
I mean, I would go back to saying if the more that the European Union can make New Orleans part of its agenda in terms of a learning thing, it's not all just to help New Orleans. I mean, it's a self-help program. But if we're not part of the discussion, you're missing a really pretty vital topic, and we're at risk here. So it's usually people listen and are interested, but in America, New York is the issue of the day, right? The Sandy affected region, people are much more interested in Hoboken than they are in New Orleans, in Washington and New York. Governor Christie is a larger figure at this point. So we need a larger perspective, and I hope we act into the relevance of that. And it's a direct plea, keep involved with us and us involved with you. I think they're mutual benefits.
Are there any other questions?
Sorry to take time with two questions. I'm wondering who in France, you were talking about the storm that you had in 2010 and the need for coastal restoration and stabilization there. One challenge we have here is who pays for it? How do we get it paid for? We all want it. We all recognize it as part of our risk mitigation, as rebuilding the wetlands and other parts of our coastal ecology to protect us from storms. How do you pay for it? Who pays for it?
Sorry.
That's an integrated team, so we share the response. And I begin, finally. Well, as you said, it's always a problem. Well, not the problem, the real question. Question of financing, sharing responsibility, sharing the cost. We have to have a multi-stakeholder system to face the very high cost. And a general comment in general on that matter at the beginning is that what we think with the World Bank and in the French and in the global level is that risk prevention is a big cost. And prevention is a big cost, and the problem of this financing is that it's a very long-term investment. And CO is paying for the start investment, considering that it's a very long-term investment, and for the private sector, it has to be internalized into the cost, and it's not finished now. And for a political point of view, it's much more than an elected mandate. And so I say in France we'll have a system to share the cost. And from the state point of view, we're trying to first organize a national solidarity, to have a national fund financing by the collectivity, which can be reflect back our catastrophe natural insurance system. Catastrophe natural could be translated by natural disaster insurance system. which is everybody has to contribute a percentage, and we have a trust fund from the contribution of all the community. And then we can open just the fund by a state decision, decision that this storm or this weather accident is a natural disaster or not, depending, of course, of the huge or not impact. So that's a first response, the state response. And
yes, I can add something too. When we build local coastal management, we have to study different scenario. And the first scenario we study is doing nothing. And we have also to study to remove the assets and the activity and to hold the line. And when we compare the cost benefits of all the scenario, the conclusion is that doing nothing is always the most expensive options. But we need to invest for the future, and we have to invest now. At the local scale, it's the local authorities that carry out that kind of strategic analysis. But they are under a framework, under a guideline, which is in the state of the French state. And to get some funding of the French state, they have to follow this framework. And if the study is validated by the French state will help the local authorities to achieve this strategy. After, as Marie-Pierre said, there is a lot of stakeholders, regional scale, department scale, kind of conurbation scale, and the local authorities, so they share the funding, but they have to follow this framework to finance the project.
Yeah. There's one question down there.
Good morning. Thank you all for speaking to us. My name is Matt Rufo, GCR. On the subject of money, you met with the CPRA. I'm assuming you're familiar with the $50 billion largely unfunded master plan and the Flood Protection Authority's lawsuit against the energy companies in Louisiana for the role in coastal erosion and subsidence in Louisiana. I was wondering, especially from the European delegation, your perspective on that lawsuit in terms of methods for funding a master plan. If there are precedents in France and Europe for governments holding energy companies or any other industry accountable for any damage they may have caused, and if so, what lessons have you learned from that should be applied to Louisiana right now in this situation, in which you've got a lot of a very divided community in terms of their thoughts on the best way to approach funding the master plan here?
Vas-y, je compléterai.
No, it's really difficult to answer because it's not at all the same legal system in France, in Europe, and in the US. So we don't have the same approach. Even when there is, we maybe focus. Even if there is a big accident, for example, and there is a lawsuit, the amount, the penalties to the company have nothing to see with the amount in the US. It's really much lower. So it's not at all the same system, the system of penalties. So it's quite difficult to answer the question. In general, the plans we have are funded by the government. But finally, there is taxes on the company to fund the government budget. So,
but for risk prevention, we have a system which says that the owner of the land, of the space, is responsible for something. It can be a company, it can be yourself with your house. And of course, their system and so on. But at the beginning, the owner of the land has to pay for something, and especially, for example, companies in France, if they want to make business with a factory, and hazardous has to be inside the planification system, and they have to do and to organize safety plan, and even to organize their part of the spatial planning to be as safe as possible in the general map, and they have to pay for that, and they have to be allowed to work or to open or to rebuild, and we have a national inspection system with civil servant making inspection to suit and even to help the companies to be in their safety plan. So one part of the prevention cost is always on for the owner of the land. Of course, for a private people with his houses, I could say that he has to have an insurance covering the way where he lives and the natural hazards, and the other key actor is the mayor of his town, and then the cost is shared.
Mm-hmm. Well,
finish, but as Vincent says, that's for prevention. Of course, with a major accident, all the penalty in the French system will be very lower compared to your system, very lower, and finally, it is the state and the government, by different way, who can pay for the damage, and we are trying to go after the disaster and to, as an integrated manner, as I say, to try to imagine restoration and recovery after disaster as the prevention for tomorrow. That's one of the things we learned from Xynthia, and also we learned from a very huge industrial accident we had in France, in Toulouse, in the southwest of France, with a AZS factory, which was, c'était quoi? Oui, mais c'était quoi le produit?
Ammonium nitrate.
Ammonium nitrate, which was a very huge accident nearly in center town. And we reinforced our the duty of an enterprise in center town, and we try to avoid to have that sort of spatial planning now.
Oh. Okay, there's one more.
Dr. Bergsmuller, is the issue in Ukraine and Russian sanctions changing the 2020 scenario or the 2020 plan that you have in place?
No, on the overarching goal to reduce our carbon footprint, nothing has changed. Those goals remain as valid as ever. However, I think on the discussion of the sourcing of our fossil fuel imports, the discussion has changed. I think, as you know, while we have an overall dependency in the EU of Russian gas of about 33%, this varies widely between our member states. While some member states, let's take Portugal and Spain, are 0% dependent on Russian gas, the Baltics, Bulgaria are 100% dependent on Russian gas. So that creates very different vulnerabilities within the EU. And I think while many of the Eastern European countries have been worried about this high dependency for a very long time, in Western Europe it was always more the feeling, well, the Russians have always provided the gas even during the coldest days of the Cold War, so there's nothing to worry about. And I think there we have now a shift since the Crimea annexation, where I think all over Europe in all 28 member states people are saying, well, perhaps that dependency on Russian gas has to be brought down. So I think in a sense, I think there's more urgency now on the European side to think about alternative sources. The southern, you could, for example, from here I'm going to Los Angeles to a conference on the southern corridor, which is this idea to bring gas from Azerbaijan through Turkey into Southeast Europe. This is now sort of back on the #1 spot on European energy diversification policy. The idea of bringing that Russian share down and to source from many different sources. I think we might see even something, because currently all the 28 member states buy their gas individually from Russia, and they pay very different prices for their gas. Basically, the price of the gas is directly proportional to your degree of dependency. So if you're 100% dependent on Russian gas, your price is very different than when you are to 20% dependent on Russian gas. And I think you hear now more and more European governments say, well, wouldn't it be a good idea if we give to the European Commission a mandate to negotiate a sort of overarching European purchase contract for Russian gas? So we would be much stronger if we negotiated that as a collective entity. So I think you can turn this always many ways, but perhaps from a sort of a European energy policy point of view, perhaps Mr. Putin unwillingly has done us a favor then.
Well, if there's no more question, thank you so much to the panelists, to the sponsors, and to the audience. Thank you so much. Before we conclude, I just would want to say one housekeeping thing. We have a little executive speaker series coming up very soon. So it's that red flyer in front of you. The first one is starting with an executive from Tyson Food, who will talk about food security. Then we will have a former four-star general and now CEO of one of the largest defense contractors here, who will talk about security issues. Later we will have the co-CEO of Whole Foods, who will talk about organic food and all the different parts to that in the United States. And it will conclude in December with the CEO of Qantas Oil Services. All of these CEOs are Fortune 300, or are governing Fortune 300 companies, and we would be very happy if we would see you here back again. I said thank you so much, and the meeting is adjourned. Thank you.